John Mohammed, I'd like to thank you. Dira Mirabani kana. Zaka چې زوم پښتون یم او تاسو لکه څنګه چې دا خبرې وکړې کنه نو زه به نیم پښتو کې وم نیم به انګریزي کې کنه لکه one of the greatest messages and education that I learned from your talk is what goes on in madrasas. Because as you said, you know, we living in the West, we tend to be bombarded with images and messages, negative messages about what goes on in madrasa. But you know, you talking about your personal experiences about the great madrasa in India, Deoband, I think that in itself is very enlightening and certainly, you know, a matter of thought-provoking for those of us who are learning from Sky News or, you know, what we see in the media. What I'd like to ask is, how come the madrasas in India are so successful, whereas in Pakistan, they're going downhill?
The reason is simple, because, you know, in India, not only has there been no politicization of the madrasas, but there's been a conscious effort for the madrasas not to become politicized. Whereas in Pakistan, there's been a conscious effort to politicize madrasas. I'll give you an example. You know, I didn't mention that I went to Darul Uloom Karachi when I was starting to set up in 2009. I was starting to set up this Islamic Vocational Academy, and I wanted, actually, we were going to have a meeting of Islamic scholars in Jalalabad, and I wanted, I won't mention his name, the main founder of Darul Uloom Karachi, the leading light of Darul Uloom Karachi, who is a great Islamic economist also, as well as being a great scholar, to come to our meeting. To tell you the truth, you know, I mean, he hardly talked to me. He hardly talked to me. You know, and the fact that I was English, the fact that I was coming from Afghanistan, you know, he just didn't want to talk to me, you know, because, you know, the fact that I was Muslim, the fact that I was a graduate from Darul Uloom Deoband didn't mean anything. You know, he just didn't want to talk to me. Last year I went to Darul Uloom Deoband. I go to Darul Uloom Deoband all the time. There's no question that, you know, my old teachers would, you know, embrace me, and, you know, there's no question that they would, because that distrust hasn't come in, you know, into the society. Because, you know, I'm just John Muhammad, who used to be their student. So this is, you know, there's been a conscious effort to politicize madrasas in Pakistan in order to mobilize this great, you know, body of manpower, basically, to mobilize it in order to, you know, fight proxy wars. And so this has led to politicization, and it's also led to radicalization. And this is my impression. If anybody has any different impression, it's from living in that, you know, that I have that impression. But anyone has any different, you know, they're very welcome to mention it. I might be wrong. When you go into Darul Uloom Deoband, you know, the only thing they're doing here is learning about the Book of God, about the Hadith of the Holy Prophet, about the fiqh of Islam, and they're learning to become Islamic scholars. That's all they're doing. You know that. Whereas when you go into, you know, but as in the case that I say, this politicization and radicalization has happened in Pakistan madrasas.
Thank you. You didn't cover upon how you became a Muslim. What drove you to Islam? Was it the Pashtoon society, or was it you saw something within the Pashtoon people, or was it something different? I'm quite interested to know that.
It was generosity of the Pashtoon people, actually. You know, at that time I was completely broke, to tell you the truth. And so there was one person who I was traveling through Khyber, and he was sitting next to me in the bus, and he became my friend. And he said to, then in those days, these tribal levies used to come onto the bus, and any foreigner who was on the bus they used to take 2 rupees off them, masul. You know, they used to take 2 rupee tribal levy, tribal duty, you know, whatever. So when they came to me, he said, yeah, you're also a foreigner, give me 2 rupees. And this Afridi who was with me, he fought with this Khasadar. He said, you know, this is my guest, and I'm not going to allow you to take 2 rupees off him. So this, you know, it was his type of, you know, generosity I really liked. And, you know, actually it was his, may Allah bless him, where, you know, wherever he is. And it was also his love for his country. He was coming from Karachi. In those days, there was no Dobe Mobe Pakino. You know, there was only Karachi they used to go to. So he was coming from Karachi, but maybe he was coming after 6 months, maybe he was coming after 1 year. He was working in Karachi. And he was just like to go through Khyber, and just to arrive in his own country, he was like crying, you know, he was so emotional. He was, oh, you know, this is my country, you know, my watan. So that also gave me, you know, that experience, I remember it a lot. Then one experience was this, a shopkeeper actually, he was in Pandar, he was you know, in Pandar, which is in the Gilgit Valley. And I slept, he gave me a bed for the night and bedding and everything, and I thought, since he's a shopkeeper, I should pay him. So I offered him 2 rupees, and that was a, you know, a normal amount for just a bed for the night in those days. It was a normal amount. So he said, you know, how am I going to take money off you? You know, you're just a guest, you know. I said, yeah, but you're a shopkeeper, you know, so you should take money. He said, no, 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 no. Because that was, you know, his generosity. And, you know, he just, you know, not as if he was doing me a favor or anything, but, you know, this, you know, was like an affront to his, you know, honor, that even I could think that you know, that he could think of taking money off me. Another thing which was actually very, you know, just the actual instance was I'd actually not been fasting. I was thinking about becoming Islam. Abdul Hadi had become Muslim. Various people had become Muslim in Kalam and in Madian. But I was thinking about it, you know. I wasn't a Muslim yet, so I hadn't been fasting for the first 3 or 4 days of Ramadan. But I'd sort of been half fasting, you know. So, I mean, I'd been having a late morning meal and this and that, and I hadn't been fully fasting. So I got to, it was Charbagh. I got to Charbagh, and I was coming from Kalam to Peshawar. And it was about the 3rd day of Ramadan. And it was, so this, you know, I just stayed sitting in the bus actually, because everybody else went off to break their fast, and I stayed sitting in the bus. And somebody just came to me and gave me some pakora or some kajure zama palaske wachwale. So, you know, they just gave, you know, like, you know, they weren't saying he's a foreigner or, you know, he's not fasting or anything like that. They just gave me to break the fast without saying anything. Some dates and some pakoras to break the fast. So this was another thing. From a theological point of view, I'll just give you from which I mentioned in my sermon in Cambridge yesterday. You know, I grew up as a Catholic. And so the Catholic, they had this, that Muns per Latini Jabaki. So they had, the liturgy was in Latin. Then in 1960s, they had this Second Vatican Council in the 1960s in the Catholic Church. And they changed it. They changed it from Latin to English. They said you can... So for me, this was like a big thing, you know. I got used to the prayer. This was their thing of, you know, modernizing the church. So I thought, you know, this, you know, it should be in Latin, you know. I mean, you can imagine, you know, if someone starts, it's not going to happen, but you know, someone starts saying Muns in English, you know, it's going to be a big thing, isn't it? But I mean, that would be a much bigger thing because it's not possible in Islam for anybody to do that. But still, it was a big shock. And I sort of started looking into this thing, you know, how did this Pope get the authority to change the liturgy? And then, you know, the infallibility of the Pope. So I did actually think a lot about theological matters as well. And there are quite a few theological matters also, but that would be a long story actually to go into the theological matters. But also then when I came to Islam, it's very clear. اتخذوا أحبارهم ورهبانهم أربابا من دون الله والمسيح ابن مريم وما أمروا إلا ليعبدوا إلها واحدا. So you know that you know there's only, and then the Adi ibn Hatim came to the Holy Prophet and said, how come how come you're saying that you're worshipping your priests and your monks? We don't worship them. And then he said, the Holy Prophet ﷺ said that, do you consider to be allowed something which Allah has prohibited but they say is allowed? They said, yes, we do. And then they said, do you consider to be lawful something which Allah has prohibited but they allow? And they said, yes, we do. And then he said, ذَلِكَ عِبَادَتُهُمْ. This is the worship of them. This is tantamount to worship of them. So in Islam, infallibility of the Pope is in fact setting him up on a par with Almighty Allah. So from a theological point of view also, there was a process. But I went into just the Pashtoonwali side of it, that they, just the generosity and the big-heartedness of the Pashtuns, yeah.
Assalamu alaikum, John. What was or is your experience of working with or knowing other ethnic and tribal groups in Afghanistan and their reaction towards you as an English Pashtoon?
I think the masses accept you as an English Pashtun completely. I think the more westernized someone is, the less likely they are to appreciate that a Westerner can come to, can become a Pashtun and become a Muslim. That's my impression. There's just the masses accept you completely, quickly. But educated, westernized elements in society, they're leaning in the other direction, towards westernization. So they can't really appreciate how a Westerner can become. This is just my impression, very generalized, but that's my impression. I've always, I think, had more affinity with the sort of people in the street, as they say, rather than the elite sections of society.